Watch this vidcast or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I am James Rivera. We have a special podcast today. We are going to be discussing the Phantasm series, the iconic Phantasm series created by legendary filmmaker Don Coscarelli.
Yes, so all 5 movies.
All 5 movies Mike and I are going to discuss and break down. We're going to open up with the first movie. We're going to have a nice little meaty discussion about the first movie, the original, where it all started. Then after that, we are going to have an interview with filmmaker Deborah Huerta. She is a writer, director, actress, producer. She's currently working on a Phantasm documentary with director Gigi Bannister, who actually is the wife of Reggie Bannister, and she did the effects on the Phantasm films. The documentary is called Women of Phantasm, the documentary with balls, and it is all about the women in Phantasm, because apparently behind the scenes on the series there were hundreds of women who worked on and contributed greatly to the franchise, which is something I was not even aware of.
Yeah, on screen and behind camera.
So she's working on that documentary that'll be coming out later this year, and she is a co-founder of the upcoming Phantasm Con. Now, you must be thinking right now, the audience is like, con, conventions, what are you talking about? There's nothing like that going on. Here's the catch. It is going to be the first virtual fan convention that you can visit online. So you're going to get to see vendors there, you get to buy merchandise, you're allowed to cosplay, you get to meet and greet artists over online. It's kind of innovative in my opinion.
And we'll have updates on everything on the documentary and the convention. People can check it out on our page. And this interview is pre-recorded, so that's why we have different clothes on during the interview. But once we did the interview, we really want to dive deeper into the Phantasm series. So James and I both went through last week. We wanted to give ourselves time to rewatch the rest of them. And a couple of them I watched for the first time. 4 and 5 I watched for the first time. And I had a really good time rewatching all of them.
Now, before we get started with the first Phantasm film, we could start discussing it. I wanted to go over something really quick about Angus Scrimm. His real name was Lawrence Rory Guy. So Angus Scrimm plays the main villain in this series, the Tall Man. He's like an alien-like creature from another dimension. He was born in Kansas City. He graduated from the University of Southern California with a degree in drama. He was a journalist who wrote and edited for TV Guide, Cinema Magazine, and Los Angeles Herald Examiner. So this isn't your typical horror movie icon.
Yeah, and he was fairly famous for writing liner notes for hundreds of classic albums.
He worked for Capitol Records, and he did the liner notes for artists like he did liner notes for Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, Ella Fitzgerald, and Nat King Cole. Those are some legendary artists right there. So this was obviously between his journalism, his acting, and his work in the music industry, this was a very refined man of culture.
So that's why the sinister but poetic dialogue that comes out of his mouth comes out so effortlessly, probably, because he's such a great writer. He
actually won a Grammy for writing the liner notes for Korn Gold, the classic Eric Wolfgang Korn Gold. I have no idea who that is. I'm kind of a composer. I just find it kind of funny. Out of all the legendary artists he worked with, that's who he won the liner notes for. I don't know who it is, so this is not like a slap on whoever that. For all I know, the music is brilliant. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. When he was cast as the Tall Man, he was still writing liner notes on the side for classical albums.
And he's a big part of what makes the series work so well.
Yeah.
The horror villain, unlike any other villain, he doesn't fit in with any of the slashers. He's not like Freddy Krueger or Jason or Michael Myers. He doesn't even fit in with the classic Frankensteins or your Draculas. He completely exists in a universe unto himself. It doesn't rely on any sort of gimmick. It's just him and his presence is what makes the villain. And a lot of the times, especially in the first one, he doesn't really have much dialogue. His presence is just purely overwhelming.
He's one of the best and most understated horror icons ever. I think he's right up there with Freddy and Jason, and I think the actual series of films is right up there with Freddy and Jason.
Certainly, in terms of inventiveness too, in terms of the way that it carried on, in terms of the cinematic quality of all of them, I would agree. Now, bear in mind, Phantasm films are not all created equal.
Yeah, that's true.
The original Phantasm came out in 1979. It stars A. Michael Baldwin as Mike Pearson. Now, this is interesting because in the first film, Mike is the main protagonist in the series, and as the rest of the films go on, it shifts to Reggie being the main protagonist of the series. But Michael had worked with Don Coscarelli on Kenny and Company in 1976, which is the film that he did prior. He was so impressed with the kid that he wrote Phantasm specifically so that it would star A. Michael Baldwin. And I can definitely see why. He's definitely, as a child actor, he had a tremendous gift, a certain type of sensitivity, and a relatability. Almost like the best Steven Spielberg characters. He reminded me of characters like in E.T. and Poltergeist, which I know is also Tobe Hooper. But there's almost like a Spielbergian quality in the portrayal of childhood and suburbia.
It's apparent right away that Mike is a badass.
Yeah.
He doesn't carry himself like the typical badass, but when he's faced with a situation, he turns badass. And he's just got this quiet, cool way about him. And he kind of keeps that in the later films too, even though he wasn't in part 2.
He's good in all of them, but I still think that out of all the performances, his performance in the original Phantasm is his biggest achievement. I felt like there was a certain type of connectedness that he makes with the audience, and obviously he maintains it through the rest of the series, but right here this is the foundation for all of it.
There's something special about this first one, and he's definitely a big component of that. It was written, directed, filmed, and edited by Don Coscarelli, and it just had a $300,000 budget, and it looks actually higher than that.
I couldn't even tell that it had a $300,000 budget. It's pretty accomplished as a piece of filmmaking. There's a lot of psychological mind games that purposefully blur the lines between the waking world and between dreams. And the film has a surreal quality to it already. I feel that the way that the movie starts blurring the lines between what's happening when Mike's awake and what's happening when he's asleep, it blurs it to such a point that it's hard to tell the difference. And I feel that by the end of the film, it leaves a lot of... Now, this is taking the Phantasm as its own thing. This movie was not designed to be a franchise, but taken as its own, on its own, I feel the film ends in a way that leaves a lot of questions in the audience's mind, and a lot of questions that are contradictory. If this is true, then this couldn't have happened. But if that's true, that couldn't have happened. It has a sort of a logic that's a little bit hard to penetrate. You're not sure how much of it is a dream and how much of it is reality.
Well, it's that air of mystery that it has, and some of the best sequels also had that air of mystery. And if you notice, the weaker sequels kind of took out that mystery and put it in favor of campy moments and action and stuff. But when they really concentrate on the story, it really shines, and the atmosphere and everything. This film in particular is really close to my heart because it was one of the first films I watched in the theater. Was at a drive-in theater when I was like 7 or 8 years old. It was just instantly iconic. I knew that I was watching an iconic horror film, and I still remember when I rewatched it. I remembered it just like I watched it yesterday. I also nerded out on it. It's a little silly because it's a brother team, Mike and Jody, and my brother's name is Jody. So I always loved that it was the brother team, Mike and Jody, and Mike was the badass out of the two, even though he was younger. Bill Thornbury played Jody, and then Reggie Bannister, of course, is Reggie. Kathy Lester is awesome in this as the lady in lavender, who was also the tall man, and Angus Scrimm as the tall man. There's a great cast in this one.
Really quick, Reggie Bannister, who went on to be the main protagonist of the rest of the series, at least in my opinion, he shares the same name with the actor, and that's because he was actually based on Reggie. That's one of Don Coscarelli's very good friends. So he based it on him, and the role was written to be an everyman, a loyal friend, and a comic relief. And as the series went on, his role started to morph into way different directions. He became more goofier. He became more of an action star. He became a lot more badass. There's nothing evident in the first film that his character would evolve into what he evolved into. And on that end, I feel this shares a commonality with the Evil Dead franchise. Bruce Campbell, who plays the iconic Ash, was based on him. The character was based on him. Sam Raimi wrote it for him because he was his good friend. And as the sequels went on, as the series progressed, he became goofier. He became more outward swagger, more comedy, more action. Very interesting parallel.
And through the ups and downs of the series, no matter what Reggie Bannister is asked to do in these films, he owns it. He carries these films like a champ, and it's crazy to see, kind of a short, bald man carrying the torch as an action hero through these movies.
Bruce Campbell, even though his personality morphed, he still has the looks and qualities of a more traditional leading man, the type of person you'd expect to play a badass. He already naturally possesses that. There's nothing like that in Reggie Bannister, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a compliment, because he creates a hero that's a lot more relatable than your average action hero or your average horror movie star. How often do you see characters that feel like real people and not a projection of our fantasies? And that's interesting because so much of the movie is a lot about imagination and fantasy, but he, no matter how goofy he gets, remains grounded in a sort of everyman reality throughout the entire series. And I think that he's the thread that makes the series coherent as a whole.
This film right here, it starts out with some really strong scenes right in the beginning. Like when it first opens up, it's that couple having sex in a graveyard. And you already see a topless woman, and she turns into the tall man, and there's a crazy kill, and you know what you're in for right away. I love the scene when Mike's grandma is telling him how to overcome his fears. It just really sets the tone for not only the movie, but the whole series and for Mike's character.
The opening scene that you're talking about is beautifully done. Like the film is a wonderful piece of cinematic composition. The look of it, the style of it, the use of blacks, the use of wide-angle space, the atmosphere, the sound design, all contribute to a sort of quality that I would kind of compare to Alejandro Jodorowsky. I know that sounds a little strange, but I get Holy Mountain vibes off of Phantasm. And the movies have nothing in common. They are vastly different experiences, but it's that sense of the otherworldly, that sense of what's beyond you that lurks in each film. A lot of the themes behind this have to do with loss and mourning and how a child processes death. The tall man is supposed to be a reflection of sort of childhood fears of adulthood and childhood fears of death. This is what Coscarelli actually had to say about it. I had a compunction to try to do something in the horror genre, and I started thinking about how our culture handles death. It's different than in other societies. We have the central figure of a mortician. He dresses in dark clothing, he lurks behind doors. They do procedures on the bodies we don't know about. The whole embalming thing. If you ever do any research on it, it is pretty freaky. It all culminates in this grand funerary service production. It's strange stuff. It just seemed like it would be a great area around to which I make a film. I've never seen a film that approached death in this way from such an innocent childlike point of view that also conveys the complete horror of death.
Yeah, and then you have the character of Mike who just stares death right in the face, and you already relate to this kid, and then you see him staring death in the face, and I loved how Mike was he had all these dream sequences featuring the tall man, and they were all extremely effective, and some of them even really scary, especially with the tall man standing over his bed like this. Yeah. And then you see the zombies come up out of the ground under the bed and grab him. Really scary scenes. And then when he's actually faced with the tall man, he walks toward him instead of running. I'll never forget the feeling I had when I first seen that. This kid that was a little older than me sees this tall, menacing figure of death, and he walks towards him. That always meant a lot to me. I like that.
When the film came out, that was actually the audience that it was most popular with was young boys aged from 10 to 13. And it's an R-rated horror movie. This is not a kid's horror movie. But I feel like what you're describing, how you felt when you saw it, is how a lot of young boys must have felt when they saw it. A lot of young people, when you're young, when you're that age, you don't really have a very strong conception of what death is. It's a very foreign idea, foreign experience. This film is a perfect way to embody it. It helps. I feel like it can help a child deal with that sort of trauma of losing somebody and the projections of it. I know some people might say that sounds weird because it's a horror movie, but I think there's something kind of inspiring in the way that in Mike's fortitude and how he deals with something, and I could see it giving a lot of young boys inspiration. When
he's seemingly alone inside that mausoleum, and there's the other one I'll never forget. It's one of the best sequences in horror history. The security guard or whatever he was grabs Mike, and then the sphere comes out, and then you see it, the spear death, where it hits the guy in the head and it drains all of his blood, and his blood pours out onto the floor, and then the tall man starts chasing after Mike, and it's a scary ass sequence. And then he runs into a room and shuts the door, and he shuts the tall man's fingers in the door, and then the fingers kind of come off, and that's when you first see that his blood is yellow goo. I'll never forget that sequence right there, and I think it's one of the best in horror history. It's exciting, it's scary, it's original. I just love it.
I've never seen anything like that since that scene. The only other scenes that even come close to what that is take place in other Phantasm movies. This series was a kind of a new watch for me. I had seen the first one a long time ago, but hadn't seen it in years. I forgot about the metal sphere. When it came out, I was completely shocked. I had never seen anything like it. The manner in which it latches onto a human host and starts spurting a ridiculous amount of blood kind of took me by surprise. It made me a little bit giddy, because up until that point, the film feels like more of a moody horror film, something that tries to revel in more surrealism and dreams. And then it has a magnificent gore effect where the blood just keeps leaking everywhere and everywhere. And the way that the metal sphere latches onto the host, the way that it spurts blood when it hits your head, is a pretty original and striking sight.
Because it was a low budget, they had to be so creative in the effect of the sphere flying through the hallways and hitting people. And one of the effects that fascinated me is they had a professional pitcher get behind the camera and then throw the sphere past the camera as fast as he could, and then they just reversed it to make it look like it was coming towards you.
That's why it looks so realistic. It doesn't reek of special effects. When you're watching it, you don't feel like you're watching a special effects sequence, which is impressive for a film in 1979, let alone a film made on a $300,000 budget in 1979. To completely make you forget that you're watching a movie and feel like you're just watching something physically, tangibly happening.
Yeah.
Very, very effective.
And it's not often that you get a horror film this moody and atmospheric and artistic that throws so much crazy horror shit at you that you normally see in a much campier movie, which the sequels get a little more campier, but the campiness of this seems to almost be out of place with the quality and artistic nature of it.
I think that's what made me giddy, because I enjoyed the film for what it was. I enjoyed it immensely for what it was. And then it gives you other pleasures that you don't expect in this type of horror film. So it kind of made me smile. It's like, oh, this is the type of film that's artistic, surreal, ballsy, but it's not above a good, well-executed gore effects.
There's so much for horror fans to love in this film in particular, and the whole series. Like the severed finger turned into a little critter with teeth attack, the dwarf driving the hearse, and that big long car chase with explosions, and then the killer dwarfs tossing Mike out of the back window. Some crazy shit. Crazy action.
It's definitely one of the most original films in the history of the horror genre.
After all this craziness and mystery, then you're in this white room where you see all these dwarves and black canisters, and then you see there's some kind of alien influence, and there's little the dead people are being shrunken down into dwarves, and they peek into another dimension, and then it turns some kind of sci-fi and goes in a completely other direction.
That's the most surreal sequence to me. It's one of the most mesmerizing sequences. And I'd say after the metal sphere, that is undoubtedly the iconic moment of Phantasm. But after the metal sphere sequence, the white room sequence is the most effective. It's kind of hypnotic in the way that it's directed. The stillness of the room, that
Yeah.
buzzing sound that they put on the soundtrack as you enter the room definitely makes you feel that you're in a very heightened place. A sense of otherworldliness really starts to creep in. I love the visual of the simple metal spheres that are standing next to each other, and just passing through them takes you into another dimension. And that is a good cinematic depiction of another dimension, because it's done cheaply and it's kind of crude, but I think that works in its favor. The harsh red of it all, it looks so beyond anything in our reality. Really stuff. I really think this is a very special movie, a very unique film. Something that has such a big cult following in horror, yet I still don't think the original Phantasm does not get the credit that it deserves. This stands head and shoulders with some of the best horror films ever made. And I feel other than a lot of its cult audience, it should have a bigger audience within the horror community than it does.
I love the concept of the tuning fork.
Yeah,
that keeps coming back throughout the series.
That's what it was, the tuning fork, when I was trying to describe the two metal spheres, the two metal, the tuning fork, sorry.
So the tuning fork represents how you get into the other dimension, and then when you're into the other dimension, I think that sound, that hum that's made, is kind of mimicking the sound of a tuning fork when you hit it and it kind of rings out. That's kind of what that sound reminds me of. So it's kind of weaved into the narrative, that the tuning fork concept. I like that.
And as much as we try to describe this movie, if you watch Phantasm for the first time and you just watch it on its own terms, you'll understand it the whole way through. Like, it's not an incomprehensible film. It's not the type of surrealism that leaves you baffled. You'll understand it the whole way through, but by the end of the movie, you're still going to be questioning everything that you just saw, and there's a lot you're gonna have to sort out in your brain. And you kind of have to pick for yourself what you believe is real, what scenes warrant, because the movie implies that a lot of this is in his head, and that's where some of the themes of it come in. When it implies that some of the events are in Mike's head, those are his projections of death and how his young mind processes and deals with it. But then, after the movie establishes that a theme, it throws another loop at you that suggests maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. It feels like different dimensions of reality are starting to crack upon each other and start in a mishmash where it becomes very hard to distinguish what's real. Maybe all of it's real and in different realities, but it's that type of film.
That's what makes the ending so effective, I think. And I think a lot of horror films kind of copy this ending. And if you notice, it's a lot like the Nightmare on Elm Street ending, but I think it's better.
Yes.
And this was actually before, so I wonder if Wes Craven was inspired by this ending, because this one had more of a reason to be that way.
But here's the reason why, though. Wes Craven didn't want to include the confusing ending in A Nightmare on Elm Street. That was Robert Shea's idea, the head of New Line Cinema. He wanted an ending that kept it open-ended. Well, it's a well-directed sequence. You could tell that it is not as naturally a piece of the narrative as this was. The ending of this film is woven into the fabric and is a part of the point of the movie. The ending of A Nightmare on Elm Street, great horror film, one of the best that there ever is. And this is not a criticism, but its ending is not something that's organic to the film that came before it. This one is. Yeah. It's not the result of a studio head or a producer interfering. This is all Don Coscarelli's artistic vision.
And I love how it ends with what becomes the tall man's signature line, "Boy."
Fucking great movie. It's original, it's mesmerizing, it's beautifully done as a piece of cinema. The acting across the board is really solid, especially from A. Michael Baldwin and Angus Scrimm. Angus Scrimm, of course, radiates otherworldly qualities, but A. Michael Baldwin is what really I feel like makes the connection with what makes the movie connect with audiences a lot. There's a certain sort of relatability to it.
I can't believe that this first one was actually originally a 3-hour film, and you can totally see it. You can totally see that there's other layers that belong there that aren't there, and I think that adds to the mystery of it. But you can also tell that there's more layers that were not being shown.
I kind of like it that way. I'd be interested to see the 3-hour cut. and just to see what all the footage that Don Coscarelli shot. But I also feel that by getting it down to its basis elements and lopping it off contributes to the sense of surrealism and the dream logic that's weaved throughout the narrative. It makes it more effective. The suggestion that there's something more than you see is powerful. I feel like spelling it out too much would make it a little bit more literal and kind of take a lot of the air of mystery that the film possesses out of it.
It simplified the film, but it's still that mystery remained, because you could feel the details were missing. It's almost like they were there. A lot of people may not know this, but this film inspired Lemmy from Motorhead to write Ace of Spades. He was watching it at a screening, and he looked at the Mike character and he said, "Oh, that guy's head looks like the Ace of Spades." And I guess he went off in a room by himself and wrote Ace of Spades.
His head does look like an Ace of Spades now that I'm thinking about it.
That hairdo.
Very 70s haircut that Mike has in this movie. But yeah, Phantasm, the original one. It is the best film in the series, the best piece of filmmaking in the series, but by no means does that denigrate the quality of the other ones, because there are a couple of other sequels that are kind of superb in my opinion.
Very interesting sequels in radically different ways, some of them. It's a fascinating series to watch for sure.
Before we get into Phantasm II, we would like to now give you the audience an interview with Deborah Huerta.
And come back after the interview and we will discuss 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Horror show exclusive.
Welcome, Deborah.
Hello.
Okay, so today we have on our podcast Deborah Huerta. She's a writer, director, actress, AD, and script supervisor in the horror genre. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Pretty good. So before we get started, I wanted to ask you, what draws you to horror, and what is it that you like about it, or working in horror?
For me, I always just liked that it's probably the most creative genre, because you can do anything in horror. Anything that you can imagine can be done in horror, and honestly, horror has the best music. I don't care what anybody says. The horror genre has the best soundtracks to movies.
That's good. I think I agree. When did you first decide you wanted to work on movies, on films?
I don't know. It's been so long that I've been doing it. I've done everything else in my life, and nothing just felt right. I was a firefighter, an EMT, I was a pizza delivery girl, I was a tortilla girl, I was a bartender, I was everything. And honestly, movies just felt like a home. It's more than any other place I've ever been.
Right now you are working on a documentary, or it's finished, I believe. It's about the Phantasm series. It's called Women of Phantasm, the documentary with balls. Can you give us a little information about what this is about and what the purpose of your documentary is?
Sure, absolutely. So the Phantasm series has been around since 1979, and it has a very particular following of people, and they call themselves fans, PHANS.
Okay.
They have been loyal to this franchise from the beginning. So this movie is the first time where we've showcased the females that have been involved in this film, which have been over 144 different women have been in front of and behind the camera. This documentary was able to bring these women to the forefront, talk to them, find out who they are, let you know who they are. I mean, we all know Reggie, we all know Angus, we all know Don Coscarelli. But what do you know about, Sarah, or what do you know about Sam? And these girls, you just they kind of just disappeared a little bit here and there. They went off and did their own thing. Well, Gigi Bannister found them. She brought them together. She put them in a room. She asked them all the questions we've ever wanted to know. And she even brought them to the fans. For the first time in a long time, these fans have been able to get their posters autographed by some of these females that have never been to any of the conventions.
Wow.
Didn't Don Coscarelli's wife, Shelley Kay, didn't she work on so many positions in the Phantasm series that she had to come up with fake names so her name wouldn't appear over and over again?
Yes, that's actually true. Dawn was very, because it's, these are low budget horror movies, and so you're trying to stay within a certain, budget. You've got your family members doing overtime. I mean, I've done this with my kids and my, my husband. It's always like, everyone's been in the movies a bunch of times on a bunch of different roles. Even actually, there's a little known fact that Melanie Ann Kay, she's the makeup artist that we interviewed in one of them. She actually was one of the little alien creatures because he didn't have an after that day, so he had to use the makeup artist and put her in a robe and have her in the robe.
How did you first get involved with Phantasm and with Gigi Bannister particularly?
Well, I started going to do film classes at RCC. I started off originally taking screenplay writing classes because I wanted to write comedies. And I still love writing funny movies, but honestly, horror comedies are like my way to go now. I love those. Yeah. But I met Gigi through RCC, and we just bonded instantly. I honestly didn't know who she was. And so I think that kind of, worked out for our friendship a little bit better. But she introduced me to horror. She introduced me to the Phantasm series, to Reggie, which was an honor. I mean, it was amazing to meet the Ice Cream Man. And and then she introduced me to a Bloody Bloody Bible Camp, which became my all-time favorite horror comedy movie.
Nice.
Whose idea was it for this project? Because I just rewatched Phantasm. Mike and I both rewatched the original Phantasm recently. What whose idea was it for this documentary, or how did this come about? What was the genesis of the idea?
Well, Gigi had this idea when she was at, I can't remember which convention it was. It's in New York, one of the sci-fi horror conventions in New York. And they were out there with Cat Lester. I don't know if you know the Cat Lester, the lavender lady, the lady in lavender. So they were at the same convention, and they were talking, and they just kind of were hanging out in the hotel room. And Gigi turned on her camera, and, low-res digital camera. And what she got was gold. And she realized that she had something there by having this conversation with Kat and recording it, that she could do this with all these other women. And so she reached out to me, and we made an effort, and we contacted a bunch of these different women, and several of them responded. And it was amazing because when we took them to the conventions, they had no idea that they had such a following.
Lately, I feel like women in horror have been getting a lot more attention. There's been a bigger spotlight on the women's involvement in horror movies because it's always been such a male-centered or a male-dominated genre. But in my experience, women compromise just as much of the base of horror fans as men do, and some of them are just as diehard or even more so than a lot of the men are. And so a lot of women are just as knowledgeable. How do you think this recognition of women in horror came about?
Honestly, where could I start? You're right, though. There have been so many women in front of and behind the camera, but sorry there. Did I lose you? There we go.
Yeah, it's fine.
But honestly, I don't know where it started. I'm really happy to see that women are no longer just the damsel in distress in horror films. That actually makes my heart. But I think that that old adage, maybe women are stronger, maybe can handle a little bit more blood. So for me, I love the blood and guts. So show it to me, let me put it out there, make it happen.
You were supposed to moderate a panel at WonderCon for the documentary Women of Phantasm, correct?
Yes. Oh, that broke my heart when they had to cancel it.
I was going to ask you, do you know if they're canceling it? It's not being postponed or rescheduled?
I mean, I think that eventually it's going to be postponed, but I think right now it's just we're considering it canceled until further notice.
So because this was canceled, this led directly to the Phantasm Con, which you guys are putting together right now, correct?
Yes, actually. So Gigi and I was going up to drop off some. So Gigi and Reggie are vegetarian, and where they live, it's kind of a food desert. So I drove up there to drop off some vegetarian food, and we were kind of joking around that we should just bring the panel to the fans anyway, that we should just do a Zoom panel and then put it out there for everyone to watch. And that idea just kind of spawned and rolled and snowballed, and now it's a big giant convention that we're trying to put together, and it's going to be, from what I've been told, that it's groundbreaking. We're trying to get celebrities, which we have quite a few signing on, to do virtual meet and greets with fans. We'll have a costume contest just like they do it at WonderCon, where they have the, the Friday night masquerade. The Saturday night masquerade. We're going to have something similar to that, where we will have online judges. We recommend and we ask people to come in, pay your $25 for the ticket, and show us your cosplay. We don't want to miss out on that. That's some of my favorite stuff, is these horror fans coming in with their different costumes.
And this is the first of its kind, right? First virtual fan convention entirely online?
Exactly. This is the first time that it's ever been done, at least to my knowledge. We know that I'm aware that WonderCon is attempting to put together an online forum for people to come and still meet up with their vendors, but they're not offering them any interactive or live conversations with a celebrity. We've got horror celebrities for you to come. Can't name any names yet, but there are some big names that have signed on and that are going to be there for fans to talk to.
And this convention is on May 1st, right? But that date is not set in stone?
Right now, as of right now, it's May 1st through 2nd. This, because it is so revolutionary and the technology is so, we're working hard with people that do, the TED Talks, the live TED Talks, so they're helping us, they're working with us. And where our attempts is to make this like super interactive and a place for all of fans to come, just like almost as if you were there, but you're on your couch in your sweatpants or in your cosplay, whatever you like. Yeah, from what I understand, it's groundbreaking. It's never been done before. So as far as we know, May 1st through 2nd. If anything changes, I will definitely let you guys know.
Cool.
Is there a website where people can go to keep up to date with the convention?
Oh yeah, if you go to phantasm-con.com, there is a link where you can enter your email address, and then we can send you all of the information, any updates at all.
And we will put a link to everything on our page, and we'll also post any kind of updates you give us. We'll let our fans know as soon as you tell us.
Sounds great.
So for this Woman of Phantasm documentary, is there a release date, or do you guys know? I believe it said December this year. Am I correct?
Yes, our attempted release date is December of this year. But since we've been doing this, and now that we have the convention and we had some notoriety with the WonderCon situation, we've actually been, someone's reached out to us, some other women from Phantasm have reached out to us asking to be a part of it. So we are actually doing our best. The reason that the date is December is because we are doing our best to accommodate these other women that have come out of the woodwork and found us.
Oh, so it's still, so it's kind of a work in progress still. You're still adding on to the documentary right now.
We were pretty much done. We were. And then Monsterpalooza, we released the trailer at Monsterpalooza, and all of a sudden a few new women just came out of the woodwork and asked to be interviewed, asked to be a part of it. And you know, we have such a great editor that we can make it work.
Okay.
Very cool. So what do you think it is about the Phantasm franchise that makes it such a beloved horror staple?
I think that there's a camaraderie and a family that comes with it. Like when you watch it, you feel like a bond with Michael and you feel a bond with Reggie. They're real characters, like they're real people. It's the ice cream man and the boy next door, and everyone knows who those guys are. And so you gravitate toward them and you feel for them and you can relate to them. And when those giant balls come from outer space and that tall man comes for you, I mean, we've all been in a mausoleum, I'm sure, or walked around a cemetery where you've just felt a little eerie about that funeral parlor guy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
We all get that. We can all relate to that. And I think that that's a big part of why people like it, because we like to be scared. I think as humans, we enjoy that little bit of that rush that it gives us when we realize we're okay.
And it's the same cast primarily and the same director and writer, so it keeps that energy throughout the franchise.
It does. I mean, there was a different director on Phantasm V, and so it kind of went a different path. But I loved it. I honestly thought Phantasm V was a great way to end this franchise. If it's ended, I don't know. I can't say for sure, but I sure would like to see a Phantasm remake with maybe a girl ice cream man.
Yeah.
Do you think you would be interested in possibly working on a Phantasm reboot in any fashion, whether it's writing, co-writing, directing, acting, producing, especially with your connections to the franchise now and the documentary you're working on? It would, I think, give you and your team a little more clout for a Phantasm reboot.
Honestly, that would be pretty awesome if that happened. I would be stoked. If anyone asked me in any capacity to help, I would absolutely, utterly say yes. Even if it meant just being the crafties. If I could just be crafty, fly on that wall, I would absolutely do it.
What is the ultimate goal for your career? Basically, what do you have on the horizon after the documentary and after the convention?
Well, for myself, I'm going to be working with, I have a friend who does claymation, like stop motion. Mm-hmm. And so we've actually decided, his name is Louis Bravo. He's a really great guy. I'll send you his YouTube link later. But he's really talented. And we talked about how we think that there should be a little bit more horror cartoons or horror animation. And that's what we're going to do. Our next step is to try and make some animated horror films.
Very cool.
So what is your favorite part of the production process? Is it acting? Is it writing, directing?
My favorite part is definitely writing. I love writing, that part of being super creative, but special effects makeup is pretty fun too.
And what do you think is the most challenging of all the positions you've been in? Of
all the positions I've been in, is most definitely it's definitely being an 80. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I honestly, that's the most work I've ever done is as an 80. But what's it called? The position, the cameraman, man, that would just be so hard. I don't think I can imagine doing any kind of camera work. Sorry about that.
I have a question. Before you go, what is your favorite horror movie?
Oh, my favorite horror movie. I really do love Bloody Bloody Bible Camp.
Okay.
And on that same branch is I know it's not really a horror; it's more of a comedy horror. But I love Tucker and Dale vs. Evil.
Oh, it's so good, yeah.
Such a great film. I love that movie.
I think that qualifies as horror. It's just a different branch of horror.
Like I said, I'm a big fan of comedy horror, and I think that really inspired me to want to do more of that movie for sure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to promote? Anything upcoming, or any links to your YouTube or anything like that?
I'm not really working on anything except for this convention right now. So if there are any vendors out there, anybody who usually heads out to these conventions and wants to try to make up or recoup the money that they're not going to be able to do because of all of these the social distancing that we're trying to do to keep us all safe, they can definitely email me or Gigi, and I'll get you the links for those. So go ahead and let us know that they're interested, and I will send them whatever forms they want.
But everybody can check out the info on this podcast, and we'll put all your links and stuff in there for information. And we'll also keep everybody updated on the page, and we'll have the links and stuff on the page. So any vendors or any fans that are interested in any of the stuff she's doing, the documentary or the convention, just go to our page or look at the links and the info. We'll keep you updated on it.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
And I think what you're doing is going to be really helpful right now because the conventions are such a big part of the horror genre. In fact, other than maybe science fiction and like superhero films, I don't really think many film genres capitalize on the fan aspect of it. So the whole situation with COVID-19 has made it a lot harder for a lot of people in the horror genre to make money, because we know that a lot of the horror stars, especially lower-end horror stars, make most of their money at conventions. They don't make it on the films or in the filmmaking. It's what gives people kind of a career. So this is going to be very helpful for a lot of people in the genre, both vendors, actors, directors. Really good work you're doing.
We definitely hope so. I mean, we've made it so that the proceeds from the convention will go to buying personal protective equipment that we can distribute to nursing homes and facilities locally in the area. They're running out, and it's a lot. This whole virus situation is its own horror story, really. And so we're living that and we're dealing with it, but also that's exactly a big part of it. We want to bring those people together. We know. I've seen the faces of these people when they get to these conventions and they see the brand that they want, or the shirt that they want, or the celebrity that they couldn't just expect to ever meet in their lifetime. I mean, I watch people meet Linda Blair and they get so excited and so stoked. I mean, these Exorcist fans they're no joke. Same thing with the Phantasm fans. And really any horror franchise or any horror movie, like, they have their dedicated fans. And this is our way of trying to give back what we're missing out on this year.
Well, I love how the convention came about so organically, and then you're taking the negative aspects of this lockdown and this virus and everything and turning it into a positive. I really respect you for that, and I can't wait to see what you do with it.
Well, thank you so much. That's really sweet. I appreciate that. No, this really is about giving back. I didn't ever get to go to a convention. If it wasn't for Gigi and Reggie, I never would have been able to go to my first convention, which was WonderCon. I want to say like 2014, and that changed my life. Like, I had never been to a convention. I couldn't believe I was missing out on them for so long, and I've gone every single year. WonderCon, Comic-Con, Monsterpalooza, I'm there, and I get it. And the pain that comes with missing out on these this year.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. We're going to keep the audience updated with any projects that you have coming up in the future. We'll keep them updated with the convention, and we would love to have you back in the future to see hopefully after this whole lockdown situation is over, we can discuss a little bit more, and hopefully you're further along in horror animation, which is actually something we need.
Definitely. I can't wait. I'm going to be working this summer with Louis Bravo. So hopefully we'll have a first footage for you by maybe October.
Very cool.
Thank you so much, Deborah.
Definitely. Thank you guys.
All right.
Take care, Deborah. Thanks.
Bye.
Horror show exclusive.
All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed that interview. And like Michael said earlier, we are going to keep you updated with the Women in Phantasm documentary slated for later this year. And we'll keep you updated with the upcoming virtual Phantasm Con. We'll update you through the podcast and through our website and through our social media pages.
I was so excited. I love that interview, and I love feeling like I'm a part of getting this documentary and this convention out there.
Next on our menu is Phantasm II, which came out in 1988, a full 9 years after the original Phantasm. And it is worth noting that Don Coscarelli did not want to make this film. I think it's apparent from the first one. Like I said, it doesn't seem like it's a film that's designed for a franchise, and especially its open-ended ending and the way that it makes you question the reality. But at the time, Universal Studios didn't have a major horror franchise. And Universal Studios is the original studio for horror. They basically invented the genre's popularity within the mainstream with their Frankensteins and their Draculas. So after they went on a binge of buying all the rights to for everything from Child's Play to Halloween, they convinced Don Coscarelli to do this movie, and he agreed because he couldn't get any other film funded. And while the Phantasm wasn't designed to have sequels, I am very glad the sequel exists because I fucking love it. I don't think it's as good as the first film, but damn if it is not exciting and entertaining as all hell.
Universal threw a lot of money at it, and Don Coscarelli used that money very well. It was a $3 million budget, which was the most budget of any film in the Phantasm series, but it was also still really a low budget film for Universal. It was their lowest budget of anything that they put out during that time.
Which is kind of crazy to think about, that its budget is 10 times as big as the first one, but its budget still doesn't even compare to what most other Universal budgets are. Really quick, I want to give the audience the synopsis. In Phantasm II, picking up exactly where the previous film leaves off, the tall man and his minions attempt to take Mike, but Reggie manages to save him by blowing up the house. 8 years later, Mike, now a mental patient, still has nightmares about the evil mortician and is the only person to recall the dreadful night. Upon being released from the institution, Mike, who's had a premonition about Reggie's family, tries to warn him of the ensuing danger. Convinced by Mike's futile warning, the two men set out to track the mysterious mortician down and rescue Liz Reynolds, a young woman who has a psychic connection to both Mike and the tall man.
And this one was also written and directed by Don Coscarelli, but it stars James LaGrosse as Mike. And if you're not sure who James LaGrosse is, he played Roach in Point Break. That's what I remember him most as. And he was also Rick in Drugstore Cowboy. And he played a good Mike, but I still think the original Mike was better. And Gigi Bannister returns as Reggie, and Angus Scrimm, of course, is the tall man. And then Paula Irvine is very good as Liz, the one who has a connection with Mike. And then Samantha Phillips as Alchemy. And this is what starts the really iconic women of the Phantasm series.
We mentioned earlier that the movie was made almost a decade later. It opens up literally where the first one left off. And admittedly, Reggie Bannister looks a little bit older. You can't hide a decade's worth of aging and sell it as just having happened. So I found it kind of odd. However, despite that, I thought it was a very exciting opening sequence, the way it opened up. It kind of reminded me of those old movie serials from back in the day, the way they left you with cliffhangers and the way that the way that they started off for the last one left off. Despite the fact that it takes the mystery out of the first one, I think I appreciated the film on its own terms. I was hooked from the beginning. I thought it was, I think it's a really exciting movie. It's very fast-paced. It's something of a horror adventure movie. It has everything that it doesn't have the level of surrealism or the moodiness or the atmosphere of the original one, but it makes up for it with a bigger budget and excitement. The gore scenes are a lot more impressive in this one. Some of them had me gawping, and I couldn't take my eyes off a lot of it. The action is more fast-paced and more exciting, and there seems to be more of it. And the weaponry is upgraded in this one. You get Reggie with his 4-barrel shotgun. A little bit of Ash and his boomstick. And more minions, more death, more of the exciting elements of the original Phantasm. It's not as cerebral, and it's not as moody, but it's very entertaining.
And you can see the budget and the special effects on the action. And the special makeup effects were actually done by Robert Kurtzman and Greg Nicotero of K&B. I love the way it opens with Liz having the premonitions about Mike, Reggie, and the tall man. So you're introduced with this new female character right away. And that's where it picks up where it left off, and then bam, you're right in the middle of a dwarf attack. And it just keeps going from there with the weapons montage in the hardware store. That's when you get the quadruple barrel shotgun. And then as they follow the tall man, that's when we start to see that the tall man is leaving cities abandoned and destroyed in his wake. And then I love how he sets traps for them along the way. So it really expands the story pretty much right away.
And in some ways, it kind of hits the same story beats that the original Phantasm did. It just uses different elements to get there. The best comparison I could think of is the Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, where yes, Evil Dead 2 is a sequel, but they're sort of remaking the original film with a bigger budget than they did the last time and a little bit more to work with, and by concentrating on different elements. The original Evil Dead wanted to terrify you more, so the second one emphasized the humor of it. The original Phantasm meant to put you in kind of into a trance-like state. The second one is meant to excite you. And regarding the weaponry and everything in it, I think it's very typical of the 1980s. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but in the 1980s, there were more action films, more badass weaponry. It was the era of movies with Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal. So it carries a little bit of that spirit with it while still keeping one foot in the Phantasm universe. I'm thinking of the chainsaw battle is something that I could have never have imagined in the first Phantasm, but it fits into this one very well.
Well, that's one of the reasons why this one also reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh,
where just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, they decided to go more action and a little more campy with part 2. And it even has the chainsaw fight, which is very reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was 2 years before. So I'm thinking this was inspired by that.
But they're both in the 1980s, and they both take a cue from their decade by upping certain elements that were popular in that era. The rated hardcore action films, which, as a side note, that's a dying breed. Hardcore R-rated blockbuster action movies.
Yeah. Effects like that great scene with the tall man monster that rips out of the naked dead body. You could see K&B effects written all over that one.
Oh man, the effects in this are spectacular. Spoiler alert, the tall man dies in this one, but not really a spoiler because they're sequels, so you know he comes back. But this has the best tall man death out of any of the films in the series.
Oh, yeah.
The level of detail that K&B Effects puts into it, the different levels that it happens, the way that it explodes, the way that his skin melts off, the way you see they put a lot of imagination and a lot of effort into the gore effects. And just like the first one had that excellent sequence with the metal sphere that really caught you off guard, there's nothing here that's as surprising as that, but you do get a lot more metal spheres and a lot more use of them, so you get to see them attack different parts of the body. And you could tell that these are filmmakers just having fun with the new budget that they've been gifted with. I could almost see Don Coscarelli behind the camera going, well, we're not making this as nightmarish or as atmospheric, but now look what I can do now. Oh my God. I wanted one metal sphere, now I could put 10 in here. I wanted to do this. There's a sense of exciting discovery throughout the movie. And there's definitely more campy elements. Some of the dialogue is campy in a way that most of the original wasn't. I don't think any of the dialogue in the original Phantasm was too campy. This one has more of a handful of eye roll sequences where you're like, oh wow, did they really say that? But it goes in, I guess it's part of the nature of trying to up the ante and trying to make a more fun film for the era.
And I love the sequence with the spear death of Father Myers.
Mm-hmm.
when they kind of introduce him, and he kind of knows what the tall man is up to, so he's trying to stop him, and he's trying to, and he rams the embalming needle into that dead body in the casket just as the relatives come in and see it.
Oh, that part.
And then the awesome spear attack. And then also in the scene following this one, Reggie picks up the first of many pretty hitchhikers, if you notice, and that is the character of Alchemy. But once he picks up a pretty hitchhiker in this, it's a tradition for the rest of the series.
It's a weird tradition, and it's an odd joke that you never would have expected from the original movie, but through each hitchhiker that he picks up, there's always a beautiful woman in each one. There's a running joke about Reggie always trying to get laid and failing spectacularly every time.
Yeah.
So things like that is what makes the rest of the little details like that are part of what makes the rest of the series a little bit campier than its origins.
Mike's driving along. The tall man appears. He's driving along in the hearse, and then the tall man appears in the back of the hearse, and they have that really cool dialogue exchange back and forth. The tall man says, "You don't go to heaven, you come to us." I love that line.
I feel like Angus Scrimm is given a little bit more to do in the sequel. He was great in the original one, but they treated him more like a traditional villain in the sense that he was there lurking around the edges, and his presence permeated throughout the film, even though he didn't get a lot of screen time. Here, he gets much more screen time and much more dialogue to work with. And the more Angus Scrimm, the better.
Exactly.
The original one still works for what it is. It still works for what they're attempting.
And even though it's heavy on the action and heavy on the gore, it still sets up some good story elements that they carry through the rest of the movies too.
This, for me, is the best Phantasm sequel. I don't know if you'd agree with me. You could disagree.
Yeah, my favorite's still coming up, but this is definitely one of my favorite, one of the top ones. Everything's kind of heightened. The spears, like you said, the spears get more powerful, and they start throwing these tracking lasers, and then now they can burrow themselves into people.
It's sequences like that where you could see Don Coscarelli almost excited or amazed at the budget that he has. It's like, look what we can do. The first one, they just latched on and made them bleed profusely. This time, we can make them dig into their skin. We can make them pop out. And that becomes common through the rest of the series. I feel like the powers of the spheres keep evolving throughout the series, and what they can do becomes more ridiculous as the series progresses. But it makes for a lot of very striking gore effects. Some very original gore effects.
And they start dipping into other dimensions more.
Phantasm II, an excellent sequel, takes the series in a much different direction. Even though it's a lot different, I think it still manages to maintain a lot of the spirit of the original film.
Heavy on the action, heavy on the horror, but it still puts some nice little seeds in there that they carry out through the rest of the movies.
So Phantasm II, when it came out, I believe, in the box office top 10 at number 9 when it debuted, and it had the unfortunate of coming out around the same time as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and other popular films.
Yeah.
However, it still managed to get a sequel, which is kind of surprising given that its box office was what it was. But it still did recoup its budget enough that a sequel was not out of the question. And the sequel was Phantasm III, Lord of the Dead, and that didn't come around until 1994. So that was a 6-year gap between the second and the third one. Like the previous installment, this follows the old movie serial format where it picks off exactly where the last one ended, the last one's cliffhanger ended.
Yeah, so basically the premise of this one is Mike and Reggie encounter new friends and enemies as they track the tall man's path of destruction and realize that he has started a full-blown invasion of Earth. Now this one was my least favorite of the entire series, but it was still good because it's a Phantasm film, because this series is so horror for me. It defines to me what horror is all about. Mm-hmm. You get characters that you care about, that they continue through the whole series, and you have a director that cares about his story. But with this one, it kind of went off the rails a little bit, but it still had enough good things about it that held my interest through the whole thing. I actually watched this with Joe Bob. it's almost as big of a budget at $2.5 million, but this one is straight to video because of creative differences with Don Coscarelli. He's had a lot of those in his career, and he actually only wanted to do this one because of the huge mortuary location that they found. And you can kind of tell because it's just this movie for me is just an exercise in the world of Phantasm.
And I guess that's my biggest problem with this, is that it's a movie that it seems to be, that is only, to me, it's mainly for the fans only. There's some stuff in there that's enjoyable, but I had a hard time with a lot of the shakiness of it, the narrative, the path that it went down. And while it does retains a lot of what makes Phantasm Phantasm, it goes a little too off the rails for my taste anyway. And it's a weird movie because it's something of a comedy horror film, which the previous installments were not. Well, the second one definitely had humor in it because it was a bigger spectacle than the first one. I wouldn't classify it as comedy horror. This one would classify as comedy horror, but for a movie that has such a goofy comedy horror tone, there aren't enough jokes in it, in my opinion. There could be, I feel like it's a core comedy that should have, if it was going to go that route, could have committed to the comedy of it a little bit more. However, it did bring this one piece of gold. There's a scene where Mike is remembering, and just so the audience knows, Michael Baldwin, the original Mike from the first Phantasm, returns for the third one. Like you said, he wasn't able to play him in the second one because Universal didn't think he was a big enough star to have a headlining part. But Coscarelli had his way this time and got him back. When Mike remembers that he has a flashback to the original Phantasm, and it's actually footage that wasn't used in the original Phantasm, he remembers that the tall man is afraid of cold and can't survive in the cold. So it produces this line: can't survive the cold. Now all we have to worry about is global warming.
Yeah.
So dumb. But as dumb as it was, it got a little bit of a chuckle out of me, and I was like, see, if they were going to go this goofy route, they should have committed to it a little bit more. More humor then. Make it a little bit more. Take it a little bit further out. I felt like it could have been took further for what it is. Yeah. And I felt like its halfway commitment to humor and its other half commitment to staying true to the Phantasm movie creates an awkward hybrid of a film. However, there are a couple things I do enjoy about it. One of the biggest things I enjoy about this is Gloria Lynn Henry as Rocky. She's a big part of what makes Part 3 watchable. She brings a much-needed contrast to Reggie in the film. Here's another thing that I liked about the movie was Kevin Connors as Tim. I felt like we could have used more of that movie spirit, because this is a ridiculous character. Reggie discovers this character Tim outside the abandoned house that he's holding up in, and he rescues him from looters. This kid is ridiculous. He's like a mini Rambo. He's badass. He pulls out grenades. He has weapons.
Frisbee,
from the tall man.
The frisbee with blades.
Frisbee with blades. He has weapons from the tall man. He's totally unbelievable. It's totally ridiculous, and it's completely dumb. But damn if that little kid did not sell his character. He did a really good job of selling something that is inherently really unbelievable.
That little kid and Gloria Lynn Henry as Rocky were two of the highlights for me. I mean, Reggie's always good. Angus Scrimm is always good. And actually, Bill Thornbury returns as Jody in this one. But the highlights in this one for me was Rocky and the little kid Tim. Even though I didn't like it as much, it still somewhat enriches the story, but in a less focused and a bit more confusing way. And the tall man kidnaps Mike and reveals that that's who he wanted all along. But there's more dwarves in this one. There's more grave diggers with the gas mask. Those scenes were pretty cool. Jody returns as a sphere, so now they've changed the narrative to say that now people can be possessed by these spheres.
And that's another thing. It seems to expand a lot of the mythology, but in a way that feels very loose. Or it didn't, for me anyway, it didn't always feel natural. I personally am not a fan of the idea of Jody being able to turn into a sphere or a ball. It seems to defy the series is loose, but it still seems to defy even its own weird loose dream logic that he could become a sphere, and the expansion of it is odd. I believe it was Gigi Bannister who discovered the mausoleum that's used in this movie. It's actually a great location, and as you mentioned earlier, the main reason that Don Coscarelli made this movie is because of the location that Reggie found. It's Angelus Abbey in Compton, California, so not too far from that. It's a beautiful location. It's really well filmed, and I actually kind of want to visit because it still exists. But that's not enough of a reason for me to make a movie, and I could tell that this is a movie full of excuses just to make sure that it gets made and to push it forward, and I think that's ultimately its problem. Like I said, there's some good stuff in it. There's good performances. There's good moments of gore. There's some funny stuff. It's just, as a film itself, it's the most wobbly film in the franchise. The last one, Phantasm Ravager, which we'll get to a little later, Part 5 has a lot of the problems that Part 3 has, but it has a much more inventive spin on it that I feel elevates it and makes it, for my taste, a little bit more engaging. I feel like it has a lot of that humor in it, but more of it, so it's actually, it commits to the comedy horror elements a little bit more in Part 5. Therefore, I think it's a funnier movie, and I think it has a more confusing, if fascinating, narrative.
Joe Bob described it perfectly. You have to keep a light buzz through at least 2/3 of this movie, and that's the best way to describe it. Keep a nice, good buzz going for 2/3 of it, and you'll enjoy it.
Either drink a beer, have a couple of beers, a glass of wine, or take a few puffs off a joint, only because the logic of this movie is so all over the place in a way that feels kind of unintentional, that being high might aid you in getting through the movie. Now, it's the most divisive of all the Phantasm movies, so my opinion is not an outlier, but it does have its cult following. There are some people who, for them, this is the height of the Phantasm franchise.
I do like that Mike returns, the original Mike. I do like that, but I think he was so misused in this. He was used much better in the following one.
I agree.
In this one, it just wasn't much of Mike, and what they did show of Mike wasn't that interesting, but it did have a lot of cool scenes, like the kid with the frisbee with the knives in it, and then Rocky was a really good addition, and then the using liquid nitrogen as a weapon against the tall man was a pretty good climax. It's revealed at the end that there's thousands of spheres. So this is when you first see that there's many spheres out there. Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty cool looking scene. I heard that was done by fans. Fans were so into it that they made a collage of spheres, like they made a video clip with a big collage of spheres, like a bunch of different fans got together. And they actually used them to make the spheres and the thousands of spheres in the movie, which is pretty cool.
And here's another issue, before we move on to Part 4, another issue I have with Phantasm III. This came out in 1994, and this is that era when CGI was becoming a thing. It was first used in Jurassic Park, and it was first used in Terminator 2. James Cameron used it. Then Steven Spielberg used it in Jurassic Park, but in Jurassic Park he used it very sparingly. He only used it when it wasn't realistic to create creatures so large. It was mostly practical effects and animatronics. This one uses CGI in a way that makes the spheres look faker than they ever did in the series. For me, you could tell that I'm looking for special effects. And we have to be honest with ourselves, 90s CGI has not aged very well. It's some of the ugliest CGI I've ever seen. And I forgot, but there's a sequence in this movie that looks like a video game.
It does.
Like a cheap video game. And it's so outdated and so bad that it kind of ages it. The movie, the first Phantasm feels timeless, and the second one does reek of the 80s, but in a way that's still exciting. This one is very 90s in a way that's dated, not 90s in a good way.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the effects and the computer, the animation kind of makes us dated, and it doesn't look as good. For me, it doesn't have the same visual quality that the first two films had. I felt that this one had the least impressive cinematography so far.
And for me, the fifth one, it had a lot more CGI than Part 3 did, and a lot less budget, but the CGI still looked better in Part 5. because it was actually done. The director was actually a special effects artist.
That was Phantasm III, the worst of the lot.
For me, the second best in the franchise after the first one is Phantasm IV Oblivion. This was in 1998. This was also produced, written, and directed by Don Coscarelli. And this time, Mike hunts the tall man through multiple dimensions and times to find his origins in an attempt to stop him once and for all. And this one's very exciting. It had elements that I loved about all the previous three. Reggie returns, A. Michael Baldwin returns in a much better performance as Mike, as an older Mike. Bill Thornbury returns again, and Angus Scrimm. The pretty hitchhiker in this one is Heidi Marnhaupt as Jennifer, and she's really good in this. So it continues the tradition of strong female characters in the Phantasm series. Greg Nicotero didn't return, but Howard Berger and Robert Kurtzman of K&B do the effects with Gigi Bannister, Reggie Bannister's wife. Just Kurtzman did the effects on part 2. And this one's fascinating to me because it jumped all the way down to a $650,000 budget. So you start out with $300,000 for the first, $3 million for the second, $2.5 million for the third, and then this one goes down to $650,000, but it's 10 times better than the previous one, I thought.
Yes, in every way. For one, the quality of filmmaking is much better. I felt like that in the third one, Coscarelli did not put as much, at least in my view, did not put as much effort into the filmmaking and the look in the movie, of the style. I feel like the elegant cinematography that we got out of the first two has returned. Because of the return of practical effects by using Kurtzman, it is a much better looking film. The effects are much better looking. The cinematography is much better looking. It strangely feels like a higher budget film than the last movie did.
It does.
It looks like there was more money thrown at it.
Well, like I said before, this is one of the ones that I had not watched before, so this was a first-time watch for me. And bam, right when it started, I was immediately more excited than I was on the last one. You can, from the first opening frame, you can tell that this one's going to be superior to the last one. It's much more atmospheric and mysterious right from the start, and begins with that slow track through the dimly lit mausoleum, and you see the tall man in the shadows. So cool. And I'm like, yes, this is going to be a little bit more of a slow burn, a little bit more story driven, a little bit more atmospheric, and that's the way it was. But it still had the action elements, the great gore effects. I loved it.
The surrealism of the first one was pushed a little bit more into this movie without forgetting the other detours that the Phantasm franchise made. It kind of takes it, I mean, it doesn't delve into what the first one was, but it takes good elements out of the best elements out of part 3, which is not too much, and the best elements of the first two, which were excellent, and blends them together. And kind of the campiness is still there. He still keeps it, but it's done to, but it's toned down a lot, and it's a little bit more satisfying because of it. The campy moments and the comic relief come at times that feel necessary, or a way that kind of fit the narrative and kind of move the story along.
And look at that 20 minutes of footage that they didn't use in the first one that they used. So effectively and so clever the way they did it. It looked like it belonged in the movie. It did not look like they just thought, oh, how are we going to work this footage, this lost footage from the original? How are we going to work this in there? It seemed very organic.
It really feels like it's a part of the narrative, the old footage, the unused footage that he uses. And you get to see the return of A. Michael Baldwin as he was in the original film, which was a very nice callback. And it's weird because I would have expected the footage from 1979 not to blend well with the footage from 1998, but because he returned the look to its more classic look, the editing of old footage with new footage is seamless in the way that it's done. And really another thing that this movie manages to do is it manages to provide a little bit of an origin and a backstory to the tall man, and a little bit more history, without taking out the mystery of who he was or who he is.
Actually, go ahead.
Most of the times when movies try to delve into a villain's origins, it ends up demystifying the character. This one adds to the character's origins, but the origins only raise more questions about the tall man, so the air of mystery is still there. So I thought that was really, really well done. He is the tall man was originally Jebediah Morningside, and he was a scientist in the 1860s operating a lab and doing experiments with time and space.
And in this one, they really explore the connection between Mike and the tall man. And I got mixed up on the last one. I was thinking it was 3, but it's 4 that has the great scene with Mike driving in the hearse. Because in this one, he's alone in the hearse and he's driving, trying to keep from being possessed by the tall man. And I think that's what happened to the tall man when he was Jebediah. He made this experiment in order to reach into other dimensions. When he got into that other dimension, he was possessed by the spheres, and then came back. In that driving scene, when you see the tall man appear in the back, I love the line where Mike yells at him, says, "Damn you to hell!" And tall man just looks at him, "Not possible." It's just so many cool lines, and Angus Scrimm really embraces this new expanded role that he has. And even though he talks a lot more, he doesn't, and even though it shows a lot of his backstory, he still feels very mysterious, and he still feels very ominous. I'm sure Angus Scrimm must have had a part of some of this dialogue because he's such a good writer. But the words that Don Coscarelli put in his mouth really helped that character shine in this one and really solidified him as a bona fide horror icon for me.
Don't you think it's weird how he doesn't age too much throughout the series? He was already an older gentleman in the original Phantasm in 1979. We are now in 1998, and he doesn't look too much older. He looks like the same tall man that we saw in the original Phantasm film.
Yeah.
Another thing that we forgot to mention about Angus Scrimm, he's 6'4", which is really tall, but to make him look taller, they put him in suits 2 sizes too small.
Yeah.
And platform boots that would make him a lot taller than make him seem taller than he actually is.
The makeup on him, they did a really good job on the makeup, make his cheeks look sunken in, and his eyes are always very piercing, and he's very he's almost dead-like, and you definitely get, they don't even need to drive home the fact that he's a mortician. He just feels like a mortician.
He exudes death. This is probably his most detailed and nuanced performance in the entire series. While it's not my favorite Phantasm movie, I think it's the one that has the best Angus Scrimm performance and the one that really gave him the most to do.
It also has another one of my favorite sequences of the series, the traffic stop with Reggie.
Mm-hmm.
That whole sequence is so good, where Reggie's stopped by a cop, and then he's waiting for the cop, and all of a sudden the cop disappears, so he goes into the cop car looking for him, and then the cop appears as a monster, and he like spits the yellow goo into Reggie's mouth. That was wince-inducing. Another sequence that I love where Mike tries to hang himself is so effective. They set it up and they make you think that the tall man isn't going to let him die, so you expect him to fall right away, and then he keeps hanging there and his body stiffens out. I thought that was a very disturbing image right there.
Weirdly enough, that scene that you're talking about, I love the way that it's shot and composed, and it's like against this like landscape that seems kind of endless.
Yeah.
The most famous painting by Salvador Dali is called The Persistence of Memory, and it takes place on a flat landscape that looks completely endless where everything around it is melting. That image of him hanging out in that desert area with that landscape evoked Salvador Dali surrealism for me.
There was more. They expanded on the tuning fork.
And then it expands upon the mythology of the tuning fork, that humming sound that you hear whenever you go into that white room and you pass through the tuning fork. And this one, whenever you bang a tuning fork, it sends off this vibration and this hum, and it freezes all of the characters from the other dimensions in their tracks, whether it's the tall man or the dwarves. It's that vibration puts them into a trance and helps them to get away for a second. So, like I said, that's another element. Expanding the mythology, answering a little bit more questions, but questions that only raise more questions. What is it about the hum? Is it a certain vibration that allows these other dimensions to exist?
There were parts of this one that were more of a slow burn, and it's more of atmospheric film, but then you still have the campiness thrown in, like with Reggie picking up another pretty hitchhiker. Technically a hitchhiker because he picks her up after she flips her car because she avoids hitting a turtle. Yet another pretty hitchhiker who won't have sex with Reggie, and then the sphere tits.
One of the funniest scenes in the movie is the stupid song he writes for the hitchhiker.
Oh yeah.
Awful, not good at all.
Oh, and the abandoned Wilshire Boulevard scene. it shows them they're kind of hopping through dimensions, and they go into a dimension where Tall Man has wiped everything out, and they showed an abandoned Wilshire Boulevard, and we live near Wilshire Boulevard, so we could tell that was really that area. And what they did is they went to that area on Thanksgiving morning, like early Thanksgiving morning, right when the sun came out. And I guess nobody was in LA at the time, so they were able to hold back just enough cars to do that scene. And it made it look like a bigger budget. Another one of the things that made the budget look bigger.
They did that based on an algorithm. They consulted with an algorithm that would determine when there would be the least amount of traffic on Wilshire Boulevard. And if you've been to LA, I mean, obviously right now with the quarantine, the traffic has died down a lot. But if you've been to LA, you know how fucking hard it is to catch it empty at all. The fact that they were able to get that scene and make Los Angeles actually look like an abandoned ghost town is pretty damn impressive, because I've never seen Wilshire Boulevard do that before. And I don't even think they had permits to do that or permission. They just went in and they did it. Worked so well, though.
That would have been so expensive if they would have done it right. You know how through the whole movie they kind of tease you that the Tall Man has a backstory. And then to begin the third act, they tell the full backstory. They give you the full thing. And then Mike controls the spheres again in the great climax, so they bring that part of the story back. Remember, they kind of hinted at it before that he could control the spheres. So they brought that back. Another great Tall Man death in this one, and we find out that he's one of many. So that adds another layer to the story. The ending is much more somber and less campy than the others, but it's still very original and effective. And that last line with "It's just the wind" is so effective for me. It
has the best ending since the first Phantasm.
Yeah.
And it ends
in nothing like that ending. It's totally different.
What's weird is that it ends in a way that seems like it could have been the end of the series if they wanted to go back to its roots, since it's a lower budget film, to end it again on another note. But as we know, it didn't end up being the last film in the series.
I love the concept of hearing other voices echo from other dimensions. A little piece of trivia for this one. This one actually wasn't supposed to be made. They were planning another one besides this one. So Roger Avery wrote a sequel that was to follow 3, but the budget was too large for it. It was set in a post-apocalyptic near future. Coscarelli actually wrote and directed part 4 as a precursor to that one, so they could get the budget, but they still could not get the budget. It was to co-star Bruce Campbell, and it was going to be called Phantasm 1999 AD, and then they changed it to Phantasm's End, but it never saw the light of day.
I'm curious to see how that would have ended up. I think that right there only proves the parallels that I see with the Evil Dead franchise. How Reggie morphs the same way that Ash does into the Evil Dead, into a different type of character, kind of a quippy, goofy action hero. I would have loved to have seen Bruce Campbell in this universe. You know who Roger Avery is, right?
Who's he again?
He came up with one of the stories in Pulp Fiction, The Gold Watch with Bruce Willis. He didn't write out the dialogue in that sequence in Pulp Fiction is all Quentin Tarantino, but the concept of the boxer who gets raped by hillbillies at a pawn shop is something that Roger Avery came up with. So that's his contribution to Pulp Fiction. But from what I heard, that he wrote an epic screenplay that would wrap up the entire Phantasm series on a big scale. So while I did enjoy the last one, I only wish this project could have seen the light of day.
And how great would it have been to see Reggie and Ash mix it up?
I think that would have been awesome. I think the chemistry would have been perfect. You would have seen a lot of hogging of the spotlight.
Yeah.
They're two of a kind. I think they're the only 2 horror icons that are kind of like heroes. There's not many heroes within the horror genre, iconic heroes. Always the bad guys, always the villains. Back in the day, you had maybe Van Helsing, then you got Ash, and you got Reggie. And Tucker and Dale. There's another one. Tucker and Dale. Yeah. The film we ended up with is Phantasm Ravager from 2016. I want to read the synopsis. In the series finale, Reggie continues in his quest to stop the evil dimension-hopping schemes of the Tall Man and his armada of killer Sentinel spheres. This time, the fight becomes a multi-dimensional battle across an alien planet, multiple timelines, and altered realities where the fate of the Earth is on the line. This movie is so fucking confusing. It blurs the lines between what is real and what's not, because the dynamic of being awake in dreams is completely erased and replaced with multiple realities happening at once and spilling into each other. So it makes for something that's very confusing, really convoluted, and I'm not sure if they had it full figured out, but for some odd reason, they still managed to make it work.
It got straight up jumbled and confusing for me, and then something would happen that would make it not so confusing. It kept confusing me and then kept making things clear, and then it would confuse me again and it would make things clear again.
It's a pattern of chaos, chaos clarified, chaos, chaos clarified, chaos, chaos clarified. That kind of is what keeps this movie a little bit more watchable than the third one, because it has a lot of the same problems with it, but its narrative keeps you on your toes, where you feel like you have to stay in it, you have to pay attention, and it looks better than Part 3. And it has a better visual look and better effects.
What captured me in this one is even when it got jumbled and confusing, you could tell it was done by someone who's a hardcore fan. Like when I heard that this director David Hartman had been a Phantasm fan all his life, and this was a passion project for him, I was not surprised. He also co-wrote it with Don Coscarelli. The stuff David Hartman did before this was like animated TV shows like Transformers, Starship Troopers animated series, Winnie the Pooh. And then he loved Phantasm so much that he teamed with Don Coscarelli, but they filmed this over 8 years, an 8-year span. And it started out as a web series where it was going to be a spin-off web series about the Reggie character. But then they ended up going back and forth and turning it into a feature.
Here's another thing. It does take place over it did, like you said, it got filmed over the course of 8 years. And I think because of that, they had to make the narrative a little bit more confusing, and they had to add the hopping between the dimensions, because there are times where it looks like it was filmed over the course of 8 years. Reggie looks different ages throughout the movie. Genuinely, it doesn't look like it's makeup. You could tell that this takes place over a certain period of time, and it's not like Boyhood, Richard Linklater's movie, where it follows the progression of someone growing up, so it makes sense that he looks old, the same actor is older. This one, it's so obvious that they had to do this very slowly over the course of a long period of time, really shows. But the confusing elements and the way that each reality bleeds on each other gives the movie a good excuse for having that look, because Reggie is different ages across different dimensions. So they found a way to make it work in favor of the narrative.
Is a great cast in this one too. Michael Baldwin returns, Reggie returns, like we said, Bill Thornbury as Jody, and Angus Scrimm, of course, as the tall man. But we also get our next iconic female character, which is Dawn. She's played by Dawn Cody, and she's Dawn and also Jane. She's two different characters in two different dimensions. And then Gloria Lynn Henry returns as Rocky at the end. Stephen Jutras as Chunk, the little person. He was awesome. He looked like a tiny Bruce Campbell.
Chunk was one of the best parts of the movie. He was a really good piece of comic relief. I kind of feel like with the Part 3, and I know I keep going back because I compare these a lot in my head, there is nothing in their equivalent to Chunk to make the horror comedy elements of it really snap. It was really nice to see Rocky return to the series, because she was the best part of Part 3. So Don Coscarelli took the best parts out of a bad movie and transferred it into this one. I wish we could have seen a little bit more of her. Her presence and the way she shows up makes you wish that she were woven into the storyline a little bit more.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like fan service tacked on when she enters, and it's so obviously there just to make the fans excited, but it still works despite the fact that it's lip service to fans.
Some of it looked a little amateurish as far as the filming went. The director is just not Don Coscarelli. It looked a little darker, but then did you notice some of the sphere deaths were more brutal? The blood looked nastier. The lighting made it look more seedy and gross. It opens with a slow-mo Reggie walking in the deserts in slow motion with his quadruple barrel shotgun. And then you go into seeing Reggie in a nursing home with dementia. And I thought for sure when they show Reggie with dementia and they start cutting back and forth, I thought for sure that was going to make the film go off the rails, but I really enjoyed it. So you're like, is this the real dimension, or is the one with him fighting the tall man the real dimension? And it gets surprisingly more interesting as the film progresses. I thought it was going to get less interesting, but you see more of that woven into the narrative, and it gets heavier and heavier as we go along, and it's always interesting, I think.
The way I view this one, it's a good movie. It's not one of the highlights of the franchise, but it's not a low point of the franchise either.
It has a couple scenes that were actually scary in this. What about the scene? I think it actually might have been CGI, but it was done very well. You remember when the lady in lavender from the first one made her appearance? And then she comes at Reggie with that scary face, like she comes toward the camera and her eyes get bigger and her mouth gets bigger. That shit scared me.
Was that the same actress?
Yeah, the same one.
They must have, either she aged really well or they did a good makeup job, because I don't know when it was shot, but it's somewhere between 2008 and 2016. Her character doesn't look that much different than she looked in 1979.
And then you see Reggie meet up with this militia in the future where it's post-apocalyptic and the tall man is already destroyed and everything, and they're fighting against him, and then he's against the tall man. So then he meets Dawn again, but now she's Jane. And I thought that was another point where they added another dimension, another time in this.
I feel like the Phantasm universe is kind of like Rick and Morty. I know that's a comparison, but an infinite number of timelines and an infinite number of alternate dimensions exist. Really quick, I'm going to mention all the different spheres. Throughout the 5 films, the trademark weapon, as we mentioned earlier, is the spheres. There are 6 different types of spheres that are in this movie. There's a gold sphere. There's the classic sphere, which is the silver one that latches onto a human host or a piece of flesh and spurts blood endlessly. There's an eyeball sphere. There's the Jody sphere, which is people who are possessed by these spheres. There's the saw blade sphere that comes at you with the saw blade.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Adds that kind of further enables Don Coscarelli to get inventive with the death scenes and with all of the gore effects. And then you have the red spike sphere, which is probably the most brutal one. That one was a pure CGI creation. They did not use a red spike sphere on the set because it probably would have been very dangerous to be tossing that around. So on the whole, I'd say the Phantasm series is a fun trip. If you're a horror fan, I feel like the series is a must, especially the original Phantasm. The original Phantasm is one of the great horror films in the 1970s and one of the most unique films in the history of the genre. And it's filled with sequels that expand the mythology. Some sequels are better than others. And even at its worst, it still manages to be entertaining. It's a series filled with imagination, filled with so much, it has such a unique spirit. There's no other series that is quite like Phantasm.
A lot of people didn't like how Part 5 ended this series, and they thought that they should have left it alone. I completely disagree with that. And I see why a lot of people don't like it, because there's a lot of things about 5 that shouldn't have worked. And in any other movie, they wouldn't have worked. It just seems to be just the right filmmaker to do this, and just the right story points where, like the CGI. Way too much CGI. It shouldn't have worked. You have to see that when they go to the red planet and everything's CGI, you got a CGI head blowing up, and the visual effects were very bold, and they went places that the rest of it didn't go because it was CGI, but it worked. It was bold and low budget, but well done. And then we find out in this one that the tall man's alien virus has spread throughout the world. And then we see the CGI of the big giant spheres like splitting buildings in half. All that was effective. I
could see why that's not satisfying for a lot of fans, though. I think that how much this works for you is just going to be dependent on your perspective, because I bought it while I was watching it. But strangely enough, as you were describing the large CGI spheres destroying buildings, it sounds ridiculous on paper.
The part on Joe Bob when Gigi Bannister comes in, that was really cool. It's cool to see Gigi. And she was telling Joe Bob about that the low budget was so low in Part 5 that they had to use their own house. So the cabin they were in was their house. And then when Dawn gets killed with the sphere on the bed, like I said, she said it took her 3 months to clean that bed. So that they really sacrificed to make this movie, and you can see the sacrifice in the movie. I don't care how many flaws it has, how confusing it is, how much CGI it has. It was all done with love, with imagination, and with heart, and you can see it in every frame of this, even when it goes off the rails.
And it was also sadly Angus Scrimm's last film. He passed away in January 2016, early on in the year, but he did get to see the cut of the film before it was released, so it's not a situation where he never even got to see his own work.
One more thing I want to say about this movie: how great was it the way Joe Bob ended the marathon? He ended it with the 12 Days of Phantasm, and he had Reggie there, Gigi, Darcy the Mail Girl, and people in Killer Dwarf Monk costumes started coming in and joining in on the 12 Days of Phantasm. I thought it was hilarious, and it was heartfelt. I thought it was a heartfelt little tribute to the whole Phantasm franchise.
And for anybody curious, if you want to watch the series with Joe Bob, who we keep mentioning, probably one of the world's biggest experts on the horror genre, he has a series on Shudder, the Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, where you get to watch a full horror movie, and it's interrupted but with his commentary. Instead of commercial breaks, you get facts, information about the movie, interviews with people who were involved. So that was our special on the Phantasm series. Mike and I have never done this before. This is the first time we've ever tackled a whole horror franchise, and I think this one was a deserving one to start with.
I really want to do it again because I really had a lot of fun, but I don't expect too many franchises to end up being as fun as this one was. But we'll give it a try.
Before we end, we have a very special guest on our podcast next week. We are going to be having David Howard Thornton on our podcast next week. David Howard Thornton, for those who don't know, is Art the Clown from the instant classic Terrifier from 2018. One of the best, if not the best, modern slasher film, and the upcoming Terrifier 2, which he just did with Damien Leone. From everything I hear, it seems like they upped the ante on everything that made the first one such a special horror film of the past decade. So look out for that next week. I'm very excited for this interview. Hope you enjoy that one. We hope you enjoyed this too.
And what better way to follow up this really fun podcast we had today? What better way to follow that up than with Art the Clown?
Till next week, folks.
Happy horror.